So as you guys may have seen in my most recent video, I have been lucky enough to have hands-on access with Jedi Survivor for about a week or so now, and I have completely finished the game. Massive thank you to EA and Respawn for the opportunity, and today I'm going to be doing a completely spoiler-free review of the game, giving you guys my thoughts on all of these topics you guys can see on screen in terms of the gameplay, the level design, the boss fights, the performance of the game, the story, and then my overall thoughts. Now I do have some quick sort of housekeeping and stuff to announce before we get into it. I know not everyone's going to care. A lot of you just want to get through the actual meat and potatoes of the review, so I'll leave timestamps down below if you don't really care, but what I'm going to be talking about is a few giveaways actually, so I dare say you guys will probably want to stick around for this part. Now, on May the 4th, which is obviously Star Wars Day, I'm actually going to be doing a charity stream, and I'm going to be starting my Grandmaster playthrough of Jedi Survivor. I've teamed up with an awesome organisation called Cure Rare Disease, which is a charity that helps make treatments and medicine for children suffering from rare genetic and neuromuscular diseases. They're doing a really big Star Wars themed charity, and they're going fully all out on this charity event. Just for context, Sam Witwer, I believe, is actually involved as well. He might be doing his own charity thing. I'm not 100% sure on all the details, but it's an awesome cause, and like I said, I will be doing a charity stream on May the 4th where I'm going to be able to do some giveaways. I'll pop up on screen what I'm actually going to be able to give away once we hit certain milestones, and so that's going to be a really fun stream, not only just to try and do a good thing and raise some money for charity, but also you guys are going to get to see me get murked on Grandmaster in Jedi Survivor. So be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that live stream, turn on your notifications so you don't miss out, and also if you can't make it but you do want to donate, there will be a link in the description to this video where you can essentially go ahead and donate before the actual stream goes live, so be sure to go and check that out. But with that out of the way, let's get stuck into my full spoiler-free review for Jedi Survivor. Now, like I said, we're going to be breaking it down into about 6 different sections. There's going to be the gameplay, level design, boss fights, performance, story, and overall thoughts, and like I said, there will be timestamps down below if you just want to skip ahead to any certain areas, but we're going to be starting off with the gameplay. Now, the gameplay of this game is a massive step up from the first game, and that says a lot because I think the gameplay in Fallen Order was already really solid, but the combat is so much more refined than it was in Fallen Order. It feels so much smoother even when it comes to the same stances that they already had in terms of the single blade and the double blade. Those alone feel so much better than the first game, but then on top of that, they've obviously added the stances, and I must say that all of the stances play absolutely amazing. They really do add a lot of depth to the game, and they do allow you to actually sort of sit down and think about which stance is actually going to work best for which type of enemy. Even when it comes to boss fights, I was really struggling with a few boss fights, and then I changed my stance and managed to get through them a lot easier. So the stances and the overall combat is just an absolute improvement across the board on Fallen Order, which, like I said, is a good thing considering the gameplay and the combat in that game was already really solid. Now, something that was probably improved even further than the combat in this game is the movement. The movement in this game is absolutely amazing. It feels so fluid. The additions like the grapple hook, the ability to now dash through midair, and being able to double jump from the very start of the game and everything like that, it just feels like you get around the map a whole lot faster. And I'm not even talking about just in terms of the mounts and stuff too. Literally just running around as Cal, it just feels a lot faster and smoother than it did in the first game. To add to that as well, obviously the addition of fast travel is absolutely massive for this game. It was one of the biggest complaints about Fallen Order was just the fact that you had to pretty much run everywhere, and obviously you can still do that in this game if you want to fully explore all the planets, or I guess make it more immersive where you just don't want to skip ahead. So that option is still there, but for those of us who just want to get from point A to point B as fast as we can to progress the story or to find a new item, for example, that fast travel system makes the game so much more bearable. So overall, they have completely nailed the gameplay in my opinion. I pretty much have no complaints whatsoever with the gameplay, and I think when you guys are playing, you're going to understand completely what I mean, because it really is just an overall across the board improvement on Fallen Order. Now, moving on to the level design, and this is talking about just not only the planets themselves but also the layout of the actual map design. It is so much better than it was in the first game in terms of the layout and the backtracking, although there are still definitely linear sections, and some even whole planets are pretty much a linear planet. It is just so much more well designed than the first game, which is something that they obviously took on board from everyone's, I guess, complaints and criticisms from that game, and you can tell that they have really implemented that feedback as best as they could. Now, on top of the way that they actually play, the planets also look absolutely incredible in this game. Just for spoiler reasons, I'm not going to go into which planets there are. I want you guys to essentially find that out for yourself. All I'll say is that there are roughly the same amount of planets as there were in Fallen Order, but pretty much all of them are bigger than the ones in Fallen Order. But I'll just leave it there. I want you guys to experience that for yourself. But just know that the planets look absolutely amazing. There are a few moments throughout this game that are genuinely breathtaking in terms of just the scenery and what's going on and how amazing it looks. So overall, in terms of the level design, they have absolutely killed it, and I feel like most people are going to be pretty happy with the variety of different planets that there are in Survivor. Now, moving on to the boss fights, and again, I'm not going to show all of the boss fights or anything like that. I'm just trying to keep everything as spoiler free as I can, but there are some absolutely amazing boss fights in this game. Now, luckily, I can show a few of them because obviously they've already been shown in trailers. So anything that has been shown in a trailer or gameplay for this game in the marketing leading up to launch, I will be able to show that. So right now I can show you the Ravers boss fight. This isn't even the best boss fight, but this one was absolutely amazing. It is definitely very tough, and they're very well thought out. I feel like the movesets from the bosses are really well designed. They do sort of change up their speed of attacks. A lot of them do have different phases, so you might get them to half health, and then it kind of goes into a second phase where maybe they're a bit more aggressive, they deal a bit more damage, and I think overall the boss fights are designed in a really solid way. I found them to be pretty challenging. I played the game on Jedi Master. I'm going to be saving obviously the Grandmaster playthrough for a live stream, but I played on the second hardest difficulty, and I will not lie, I got stuck on a few bosses for a few hours. So if you're not looking for a tough game, I'd recommend putting the game on an easy difficulty, or if you're like me and you really like the, really difficult bosses, then you are going to have a lot of fun with this game, because even on the second hardest difficulty, there were a lot of times I got kind of stuck, and I did eventually get through them obviously, but they definitely provided me with a bit of a challenge. On top of the main story bosses, there are definitely a lot of hidden bosses around the place too. Again, I'm not going to spoil them, but keep your eyes peeled for the channel, because I'm going to be doing a lot of really interesting content on a lot of the hidden bosses you guys are going to find around each planet, and there are definitely some really interesting bosses, some, I guess, familiar faces, that's all I'll say, and there are even the legendary enemies that there were in the first game too, not necessarily the same enemies, but there are some more like legendary bosses that are not mainline bosses. They're not even as hard as the main bosses either, but they're kind of just scattered throughout each planet like they were in Fallen Order. Overall though, the boss design in my opinion was absolutely amazing. All I will say is there are definitely some boss fights that will blow your minds, both in terms of like story elements, but also they are just absolutely awesome as well, and I cannot wait to see everyone's reaction to each boss fight. Now, moving on to the performance, and this is probably the only area that I have anything negative to say about the game whatsoever. Now, the performance in general was actually really solid. I played on PS5, so I can only really speak on that as of right now, but I will be playing on the Series X as well eventually. What I will say is that although for the most part I would say 90% of the time the performance was really good, I was getting pretty much 60 frames a second and there was no like issues or anything like that. For the other 10% there definitely were some frame drops, mostly in areas where you're sort of rendering a lot of terrain, or maybe there's a heap of enemies and a lot of detail in the buildings, for example. There definitely are some frame drops in there, so be prepared for that. It was never anything that's like unplayable. It was mostly like if the game's playing at 60 frames, it would sometimes feel like it drops to about 40 frames a second or something, where it was definitely noticeable to me, but it wasn't unplayable. It didn't like affect the gameplay. It was more just a little bit annoying. But yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The performance was not perfect, and I dare say this is probably why they delayed the game a little bit, just to try and I guess iron out the kinks a little bit more in terms of that performance. So like I said, just expect that. Also keep in mind, I was actually playing before the day one patch. They have told us that in that day one patch they've done a lot of stuff to sort of address those performance issues. Now I can't speak on that just yet because obviously I haven't played it as I'm recording this, but I guess the version that I'm playing is not the version you guys are going to be playing. It is technically pre-release because the day one patch will have a few extra weeks worth of work on the performance and stuff like that. So that is at least one positive, that although I had, 10% of the time there was some slight frame drops, that may be a lot better when the game actually launches in essentially just over a day from now. Outside of like frame rate though, I did not come across a single bug in the whole game except for one that was during a cutscene where essentially the character that was on screen, they just didn't really render in. So Cal was just talking to no one, but also it was during a boss fight and I'd seen that cutscene like 4 times because I'd been murked by that boss countless times. So that is literally the single bug that I encountered the entire time. There was also one moment where an enemy during, I guess it was almost like a wave based like mission where there was just heaps of enemies coming after me, and there was one enemy left and they were kind of like stuck behind a certain thing and I couldn't find them for a while, so I was just waiting for an enemy, but I could hear them and eventually I just went and found them and killed them anyway. So those are literally the 2 things in the whole game that I noticed were a bug. One of them wasn't even a bug, the enemy just sort of got stuck on something, and then the second one was just during a cutscene anyway, and to be honest it kind of made the cutscene even funnier. So in terms of bugs there was almost nothing of note. And again, that day one patch may actually fix some of that stuff anyway. Overall though, in terms of the performance, I think the game, I would say, performed fairly well. I wouldn't say it was like super smooth because of that, 5 to 10% of game time where there were frame rate issues and stuff like that. But overall, especially considering the fact that most people are probably going to be on PS5 and Xbox Series X, I think the performance will be pretty solid. If you're on like a mid-level PC, I won't lie, you may struggle a bit. If you're trying to play on like a gaming laptop or something, you may struggle. But outside of that, I think the performance overall was decent enough to where I don't think it was a genuine issue, but also it was noticeable that it had frame drops. So it was far from perfect, but it wasn't something that I think is going to be a genuine issue either. Now moving on to the story, and like I said, going to be completely spoiler free here. I'm just going to talk about my opinion of it, not going to be talking about any actual story elements. Overall, I think the story was pretty much on par, if not even slightly better than the first game for me personally. Now granted, I do like the High Republic era, and we all know from the trailers and stuff that the High Republic is a part of this game. Now, it's not a huge part in terms of if you haven't read the books, you're not going to know what's happening. It really just kind of touches on it, but overall, I thought the story was amazing, and there's some really, really emotional moments throughout the game. I won't lie, I pretty much got as close to crying as you can without crying at certain points throughout the game. It did definitely make me very emotional, and one thing that I thought was worth noting as well is that the cinematography of this game and the performances during the cutscenes and stuff, it honestly feels like a different game than Fallen Order, and I mean that in the best way possible. Fallen Order definitely felt like the entry to this franchise and to this genre of game from Respawn. This game felt more like a movie. During the cutscenes, the graphics and the way that the characters looked, the cinematography of those cutscenes, and the performances from Cam Monaghan and essentially everyone in the cast, it literally felt like a movie at certain points. So I think you guys are going to love that. For me, it was very reminiscent of certain games like, for example, God of War and The Last of Us, and I know that's very, very high praise. I'm not going to say the game is on par with those games, but I think it took a step up in terms of the cinematography and the performances and stuff to get to almost that level where those for me are like some of the most well-made story-driven games ever, and the cutscenes are almost as good as the actual game, which is not the case for a lot of games out there. For me, this game felt like that. It was never boring during a cutscene. I was completely hooked the entire time, and you can just definitely feel like the quality of the story oozing when you are actually playing, or I guess watching those cutscenes. Now lastly, on the story side of things, what you guys can expect in terms of the length of the game, it took me 22 hours from start to finish the main storyline. Like I said, I played on Jedi Master, so the second hardest difficulty, and then there was also a little bit of exploration done in that. So I would say like somewhere from 18 to 22 hours is probably going to be par for this game. 18 hours if you're playing on easy and you don't do any exploration at all, you just do the main story. And then, like I said, for me, playing on a slightly harder difficulty where you get stuck on bosses for a little bit, as well as doing some exploration, it's probably going to take you more for like the 22 to maybe even 25 hour mark. So it's definitely longer than it was in Fallen Order, which is a really good thing, and it didn't feel too long to me, and it also didn't feel too short. I thought they actually nailed the length of the game. So overall, story-wise, it was, for me, a worthy successor to Fallen Order. The story was roughly on par, or at least for me, better. Obviously, story is a little bit more subjective, but yeah, it definitely felt like a worthy successor to Fallen Order in that sense. Now, as for the overall thoughts, I'm going to try and just sum it up quickly here because the video is dragging on a little bit longer than I thought. Overall, for me, this game is better than Fallen Order in every single way. It is exactly what I wanted from a sequel. The only thing that I would probably say Fallen Order did better was maybe just the absolute chaos of the ending in Fallen Order. Obviously, Vader showing up at the end and giving that a really, really climactic ending. That's really the only thing that I would say that game did better, and that's because Darth Vader is my favorite character. So when he showed up, I obviously flipped. That's going to make it sound like the end of this game is boring. It is definitely not boring whatsoever. There are some crazy twists and turns throughout the story, and like I said, overall, I think it was better in every single way than Fallen Order. I am confident to say, and obviously this is just my opinion, but I am very confident to say this is the best Star Wars game of all time. I wasn't quite sure enough to give that to Fallen Order. When that launched, I thought it was up there for sure with the likes of Force Unleashed and KOTOR and those, you know, classic Star Wars games. But to me, this absolutely blew all of those out of the water. And for me, it is absolutely hands down the best Star Wars game of all time. So I do not say that lightly. I gave that a really good think before I committed to saying that, but I really do think that is the case. This game was definitely worth the wait, and essentially how I would summarize it is, if you enjoyed Fallen Order, you are definitely going to enjoy Jedi Survivor. But that is going to do it for this spoiler-free review for the game, guys. There is so much content on the way, not only on this channel, but also if you guys haven't checked out my Clips channel, there is going to be a lot of content on that channel too, showing off a heap of like Easter eggs and how to get certain items and all that kind of thing. And then on this channel, I'm going to be doing a lot of that same type of content, showing off how to do each puzzle room and how to get all the best perks and all those sorts of things. So if you guys are interested interested in the game, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. There is a lot of stuff that you do not want to miss. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is some stuff coming up on the channel that is probably going to blow your minds, because some of this stuff is very easy to miss in the game. So keep your eyes peeled for all that content on the way. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the force be with you always.